Excuse me.
Welcome into another episode of the Autzen Audibles podcast here on a Saturday morning. Oregon's in fall camp, and we've got a great guest who's, as you can tell by his background for viewers, he's in a familiar spot. This is Yogi Roth, former Pac-12 Networks analyst turned Big Ten Networks analyst. Weird seeing you with that polo on, Yogi. How's it going?
It's great. Yeah, it's great to be here. And it's kind of weird. That's just a great descriptor. I think for Ashley Adamson and I, we just began our training camp tour. We were up at UW yesterday. We're down in Oregon today, and seeing the Big Ten logo or wearing the Big Ten logo, it's just different. I think when I go to Penn State tomorrow, it's not going to feel weird, right? Or when I go to Ohio State in a couple of days, and Rutgers and Michigan, like it's just going to be it's the four schools that clearly we're so familiar with that now have changed. So a little getting used to for everybody, but the thing that as well as anyone, man, is that it's really about the people. So after the initial whoa, this is kind of weird. It's not like I'm looking at my shirt the whole day, or looking at your mic flag. Like you're just talking football, and Jerry DiNardo and the executives of the Big Ten, and everybody, of course, at the schools have just been phenomenal. So once you settle in, it's same old, same old.
And I know a lot of our listeners have become big fans of yours through the Pac-12 networks and are really excited that you and Ashley and some of the others were brought on with the Big Ten and to continue to see your faces. But can you just give us and our listeners kind of in as much detail as you want or are comfortable with, kind of what the last 2 to 3 months were like, maybe since the Pac-12 kind of came to a close and this new journey's begun?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I could talk about the last 2 years, from when two schools departed, and then last year, literally, I think tomorrow is the anniversary of when it all kind of fell apart in that fateful morning. So I can remember where I was a year ago. I was at Rams practice with Marcus Arroyo, the former OC
there you go.
from here at Oregon, and we were just talking through God, I wonder what's going to happen tomorrow. Would we sign a deal with Apple? What was going to happen with the future of the league? And then August 4th happened, and here we are. I think the last couple of months for me has been a little bit of everything. It's extremely exciting because you recognize this league, especially being at Media Days last week, does span the country. It feels bigger, not to use that word, but it feels bigger than any other conference, right? Like it feels bigger than the SEC. The SEC has had tremendous success, but it's locked in its region. The Big Ten truly is national when you look at that new Maps commercial. That's exciting, and it's exciting to be a part of that. And the thing that I'll always carry with me, and I have and will continue to say in every interview setting, the thing that breaks my heart is that there's 200 employees at the Pac-12 who thrived. I would have put our games, our shows up against any network, and they're out of work by no fault of their own. That part is going to eat at me forever. It's why I launched my own platform to try to bring on some people that, I've worked with in the past that are really talented. And it's why I'll continue to advocate for producers, editors, you name it, that have worked at the Pac-12 networks for, some over a decade. And now we're trying to find their next move. And it's always going to be the worst part about it.
Let's maybe a natural transition to talk about the Y option and everything you're doing over there and give our listeners kind of an idea of what the mission statement is for that platform and that podcast.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I mean, look, I'm so stoked to call games every weekend. I'll be with Guy Haberman and Rhett Lewis on the Big Ten Network. And on Saturdays, I'm going to call Oregon's opener and kind of work my way throughout the conference as the season goes on. But as last year went on, and as I talked to coaches, ADs, players, families, fans, I recognized one thing just kept coming to the surface, which was, where are we going to tell our stories? Like, of course, with your own channel, the Oregon social media channel, the Arizona social media channel, but there wasn't a lot of cross-pollination, right? Especially the schools in the Big 12. There's no Big 12 network, right? In the Atlantic Coast Conference, there's two teams that literally, like at Cal Stadium, you're looking at the Pacific. So I always thought, how are they going to tell their stories? And I would ask, and the answer was we don't know. We're going to try to figure that out. And as I knew I was going to take a job with the Big Ten Network, covering 4 teams that used to be in the Pac-12, I said, man, I spent 20 years in this league. I'm not just going to stop paying attention to Arizona State and Utah and Colorado and all these teams that I've really grown to love and hopefully gained some trust from their fan base. So I called up Jim Thornby, a colleague from the Pac-12 forever. And I said, I have an idea. And we brainstormed on it all year. And by the end of the season, we netted out let's go do it. So we created what you referenced, which is a new show called Y Option. And the goal of it is to talk about college football through the lens of the West Coast. Y option being a core principle in the West Coast offense. All of the fans, I think, are looking for their options of how they're going to consume content. Your podcast being one of those. And I was looking for an option too. and decided to utilize a little agency in my own career and say, I want to start something. It's based on thoughtful dialogue, not yelling and screaming like we see, I think, all too often, but also because of my relationships, getting players like Dylan Gabriel on. I just had him on recently, or Miller Moss, and we Brent Brennan on, early next week. I got Pete Carroll coming on next week, the week after that. Like, just trying to have a place for thoughtful dialogue around football through the lens of the West. I think West Coast fans will dig it, hopefully. And then when you're a Michigan fan, you're like, well, what's going on at Oregon? What is USC like? Hopefully, this is the a landing spot for a lot of the fans that are also trying to be curious about what's going on the West Coast. And then I think lastly, we want to drive dialogue. Like all too often, we hear the narrative from the East Coast. The Pac-12 is soft. The West Coast isn't physical. Whoa, whoa, bro! Like, I've watched every snap of this league for 20 years. That's actually not the case. So let me share a narrative from this lens, and that's been really fun to do for over the course of the last month. So yeah, check it out, man. Yoption.com.
Yeah, I've listened to a couple. It's great work. I highly recommend it for our listenership to take a listen, especially as you say, if you're looking for the West Coast perspective. It's cool to see that. And I think, kind of, again, maybe another natural transition to my next question, which was, what's been your perspective on Oregon and Washington and USC and UCLA and the reception into the Big Ten? You were just in Indy last week. I was as well. I came away thinking like, there seems to be a good amount of mutual respect and appreciation at some level. You also sit in meetings with other Big Ten colleagues, and they probably have certain opinions. I guess just from your perspective, what did you kind of experience and take away from just kind of that introduction for these new schools into the new conference?
Well, I think it helped that the Pac-12 had an epic year last year, and all four of those schools went bowling. They all bring something to the table, right? Oregon was the toast of media days. Their day that they were there. I would be curious to see what it feels like next year if they're there the same day as SC and Ohio State. But they were there with the defending champs, in Michigan, and Oregon was the story. So I think there's great creatives to take there and great respect. I think for UW, like, there's tremendous excitement around other fan bases going to see what it's like at the greatest setting. I think for USC and Lincoln Riley, that's always going to be a story. And then for UCLA, they've won. The last couple of years, they've won 8 games. They've been to bowl games. So I think that these 4 teams come in a position of strength versus 5 years ago. It might have been a mixed bag. So yeah, I think there's respect from the coaches for sure. I think the fan bases, they're kind of like all of us. Like, we're curious. Like, is it a more physical league? Are the defenses that much better? My theory is, I know their defenses were elite at Iowa and Michigan and Ohio State, but I also know that they didn't have to face Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., and Caleb Williams and company, and Noah Fafita, or et cetera, last year. So I'm curious this year, what are those defenses when they have to face an offense like the one that Dylan Gabriel is going to be running, and the one that Miller Moss is going to be running, the one I just saw yesterday that Will Rogers is going to be running. That I'm just curious to see. Like, I don't know, but I don't think these 4 teams are going to go get rolled in this new league by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I don't either. I know you look at the preseason. It's weird, by the way, they don't have a media pool like built in. Like, that's always one thing the Pac-12 did. It was collected by a couple different media organizations out in the Midwest. But just kind of looking at the way those were comprised, there seemed like there was quite a bit of respect for the new Pac-12 turned Big Ten teams. Oregon being second, I think USC was like 5th or 6th, and Washington was 9th or 10th. I think UCLA was a little further down, but from your perspective, and this is an Oregon podcast, we're going to turn, for our listeners, we're going to turn and talk deep into Oregon here in a second. But for the other 3 schools, kind of what do you see as the outlook, maybe some of the challenges is that they face entering this conference?
Well, I think schedule is going to be a challenge. I think travel, you have to talk about it. Like, UCLA is traveling 22,000 miles this year, and Indiana is traveling less than 5. And I get one trip is Hawaii, one is Baton Rouge, but you're still getting on a plane. Like, you still have to go to class. All 4 of these schools are high achieving academic schools too. Take a lot of pride in that, like the other 14 in the Big Ten. So I don't know. I think that'll be something that'll be noteworthy to discuss. I think the thing that I'm probably most intrigued by is that you look at, like, call it the mid-tier teams, Rutgers, Nebraska, and then you even look at like Indiana, Illinois, Purdue, like some of those teams that are slated in that preseason poll you referenced. I think it was Kings Up North is one of the groups that does that, which is a great podcast follow for anybody who's trying to learn about the Big Ten. And those are like scary games, much like a Cal and a Washington State and an Arizona State used to be back in the day. And everybody's been snake bitten by one of those teams. When you look at like people that were, I don't even remind Oregon fans, Jaden Daniels and Brandon Ayuk in a slant and go back in November a couple years ago. I think that same thing for this league. And the one thing that hasn't changed in college football, and I don't think ever will, is that they're still 18 to 22. And the one thing I know is that there's a lot going on in your mind at that age. And it's really challenging to bring it every single weekend. Like, you just don't. You're just not going to. And yes, the expanded playoff allows you to slip up, but you also have tough games against like the top tier teams. Penn State, Iowa's going to be better. Michigan State with Jonathan's going to be dangerous. And of course, Ohio State, Michigan. So I think that's going to be the thing that I'll look at, like these quote unquote trap games. Like when Indiana comes to UCLA in their first Big Ten game at the Rose Bowl on NBC in, I think, week 2, does Indiana get a win? Like, I don't know. I'm going to be at Indiana in 2 weeks, but I don't think it's like, I don't think there's any locks, I guess is probably the best way to say it. Like, these teams are all going to be pretty competitive, which hopefully should make for a really fun season.
Yeah, I was looking at those travel numbers too. And for Oregon fans, Oregon travels, I think, 12,500. So still quite a few miles, a lot more than normal. But compared to USC and UCLA and Washington, who are all, I think UCLA and Washington are both like over 20,000 miles. So that's a significant change. Oregon, and from a weird way, sort of benefited. I know it's going to rotate every year in terms of who takes the furthest trips, but Oregon has it easier to start. But as you said, like some schools like Indiana, it's less than 5,000. I think Ohio State's like 7,000. Like it varies a lot in terms of the challenges the schedule presents, which I think is going to be kind of a fun component to this, and maybe not so fun for West Coast schools some years, depending on how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's going to allow Oregon to take a run at this thing, and I'm a believer in this team as much as anybody in America, the substance of the team, not the hype of the 4 and 5 star recruits that they have and what they've done in everybody's ranking and postseason and preseason polls. It's the substance of being a veteran team. I think the thing that's changed with NIL is clearly we're seeing players stay. Ohio State's a perfect example. Washington was an example of that last year. I think the veteran teams in a 16, 17 game season are going to be the ones that have kept their team in a week 3. You get a big win and making sure everybody's not going out and going crazy on a Saturday night. Like, I just think that's going to be a thing. Like the maturity of team, I think the most mature teams are going to find themselves in the playoff because they won't slip up in some of those trap games. Because for Oregon, yeah, they might not have to travel as much as UCLA, but they got they got the most challenging schedule of the 4 schools, in my opinion. They got to play Ohio State, they got to play Michigan, they got Wisconsin. Like, where's the break, man? Like I just look at their slate, and it's not going to be easy to go unscathed through any season, and definitely this season for them.
And you're right on the no break thing, because it's a 2 bye-week schedule, and Oregon has one right at the beginning and one right at the end. I think it's 8 consecutive or 7 consecutive weeks without a break. So that'll be interesting to kind of see how they manage that throughout the course of the season. I wanted to pick your brain on Will Stein. Like when I was out in Indy, I had so many people asking me about him, trying to compare him to Kenny, or just what makes him so good. I know you've probably spent a little time with him. You've watched him at practice and games. Like what stands out to you? Because this is a guy who I think is still, despite last year and statistically having arguably the greatest season in Oregon history, and that means something considering some of the offenses, I think he's still kind of like a relative unknown nationally.
Yeah, I think he's a stud. I love his pedigree and his background. Let's talk about his pedigree. Walk on quarterback, found a way to compete. I'm going to lean that way just because I live that life as well. I think there's something to that. You have to show up in a different way every day. And then you look at his coaching tenure and the influences. Yes, he didn't start at USC and all just skyrocket like a Steve Sarkisian or Lane Kiffin, who was they were young, hot coordinators back when I was coaching. I love that he went and it was in high school and calling plays at a prestigious high school in Texas. I say that because like the best teachers are in high school. Like, how many times do we hear that? It's just true. I coach high school quarterbacks for a couple of days a year at the Elite 11, and you can just tell that it's the same thing. Like, the best communicators, the best teachers are probably at that level. And then you watch what he did at UTSA, and then you watch what he's done here. And then I go back to the foundation of football. I reference Y option, like foundational West Coast offense. West Coast offense based on triangles, based on spacing, based on, as they always say around here, time on task. Like, it is a timing-based offense. And I really believe this, that you can either play catch or you can play quarterback. And the teams that play catch can get to 8 or 9 wins. And you could spin it and spray it all over the field and find your green grass and all those things. And there's something to that. And if I was a first-year head coach at a rebuild program, I'd run a version of that offense. But if I was trying to really win it and go for it, I'd be doing what they're doing here. And I love it because there's a variance of tempos. There's new wrinkles when you look at the way that they motion. Like I just went back and started studying some old games just in advance of our training camp show here today. And we won't get there today in our show tonight that you could watch. I think it's at 9 o'clock Pacific on Big Ten Network. But when I call their first game, we're going to get into it. Like we're going to get into the X and O's and how Will Stein and company really allow themselves to build upon things they've done in the past. And that's how Kenny was, right? Think of Josh Connerly in the BYU game. What's it, 7 straight snaps? He's playing like extra offensive lineman, right? Like I love that mentality of repeat play callers. And there's a foundation there that I think is in the West Coast system that has allowed him to keep growing through all of his influences. So I think he's a stud. I hope he stays here for a while. I think he will be able to get a bunch of head jobs, right? Houston or whatever. Like he's been rumored for jobs over the course of the last year. I think this place is a juggernaut. I don't think this place is going anywhere but up. And I don't know how he feels if he's like trying to be a head coach as quickly as possible. But there's a world where he can be a little patient, kind of like Steve Sarkisian was. Like he turned down the Raiders job. He turned down a bunch of jobs to go get the UW job back in the day when he was a version of Will Stein. I'd love to see Will just keep working this thing until the job, like Kenny Dillingham got his dream job. Like, wait, I don't know what that is for him, but whatever it is, Will's going to be in position to go get it based on the success they're going to have at Oregon.
Oregon fans certainly agree with you. They want him here as long as he's willing to be here. And they, I think it was interesting going from Kenny with the 1 year, and then they bring in another guy, a young guy, and the hope is, hey, let's hope this guy sticks around a little longer, and we'll see what happens. Obviously, if the offense is as good as people think it will be, there's going to be opportunities. He has, and so maybe some tough decisions for him. I'm curious on that. This is a narrative I see, and I disagree with it. I think you're going to disagree with it, but just that the West Coast schools aren't good in the trenches is something I'm seeing, or that the Big Ten schools are going to have a huge advantage there. And again, I want to stay focused on Oregon because I think that whether or not we think that's true of all the schools, I think it's certainly not true for Oregon in terms of their strength there. What do you see there, and what do you just think of that notion in general when you hear that?
Yeah, it's a great conversation piece. Jerry DiNardo, the coach on the Big Ten Network, we talked about that all on media days on set. We're doing this tour together. He's amazing, by the way. You got to have him on your show. And we talked about that last night at dinner. Like, what do you think of UW compared to the Big Ten schools? And we know that Ohio State, I'd argue Penn State, Michigan, like they're elevated, right? Like Oregon is. But everybody else, like they're pretty similar, is what he referenced to me. So I don't think it's going to be as dramatic as people think. I think the thing is, I've talked to other analysts, like I met with Todd Blackledge, Joe Clapp. I wrote about this in one of my newsletters at yoption.com of it's not the trenches, that's winning football, but it's really like the wind. It's like part of the weather in November that is really a challenge. Like, can you cut through? Like, how does that shrink your call sheet? That is to me what I'm going to be most intrigued in some of these cold weather communities and extremely windy. Like, what's it like at Northwestern in November, Wisconsin in November? Like, you look at, let's schedule how Oregon is laid out. That's what I'm probably most intrigued in. Do I think UCLA is going to like dominate the line of scrimmage in year one with Deshaun Foster? No. Is USC going to be better on the O-line? Dramatically. Is UW going to be better than last year? No. They won the Joe Moore Award, but they're going to be okay because they're going to call it right. Well, Oregon be one of the best offensive lines in America? They should be. They should be. You look across this thing, I called their spring game. I can't wait to watch them practice. They're physical. You know how they practice against this defense that is physical. I love the competitive depth of this team. So there's so many better reps, like good on good. So I expect them to move the line of scrimmage and win the line of scrimmage battles. And the best one will be when they play Ohio State. I think on paper, what is it, October 12th or 13th or whatever that game is.
Yeah, October 12th. It's on everybody's schedule out here. People
October 12th.
They're so fired up about it. I had a couple more for you. One on just kind of temperament of a team, right? Because like I was really struck this week. We interviewed like half the team. We had interviewed 44 players on Monday for Oregon's Media Day. Like they just bring everybody out. And,
wow.
Yeah, it was a lot. But I came away thinking this team has a lot of self-confidence. starts with Dylan, but just through again, dozens of interviews and conversations, I was like, man, these guys really, they're buying some stuff. They feel good about themselves. What do you think? And obviously their aspirations are one thing. They want to win a national championship. Like they've made that clear. If you ask any of them, they'll tell you that. What do you think? Because I know you've been around some teams like this before. What do you think that says, like preseason, just to have not just expectations, but like something backing it up in terms of that confidence and that maybe a swagger that sometimes is missing? What does that mean, do you think, for a team entering a season like this?
Well, I don't. What does it mean? I don't know. I think every team in America thinks they're going to win it all now, and they should. All right. I felt that as a player. Every team I've ever been around as a coach or an analyst feels that way. But I net out this, and I'll talk about this on our show. I learned this at SC under Pete Carroll. Like, there's a difference between hoping versus knowing. So here's the example. This is at least how the legend goes. We're playing the national championship game against Oklahoma, and in the newspaper down in the Miami Herald, there's an article about Oklahoma, and their players are getting interviewed. And there was potential weather issues the night of the Natty, and they were like, "We hope it rains so Reggie slips. We hope it rains so they drop the ball." And the night before the game, Pete pulls out that newspaper clipping and he goes, "These guys hope. They hope that it rains. They hope that you slip. Let me tell you what we know. We know we're going to run the daylights out of the ball. We know we're going to create explosive plays. Like we know." And I've always loved asking head coaches this, like, because where's your team at on that scale, hope versus knowing, right? Like, I know it's a bitter rival for the people in this podcast, but Oregon State, when Jonathan Smith got there, it was a lot of hoping. It took a couple of years for them to know that they could compete in any game, right? I think this team, because of the way that Dan Lanning communicates, because of his DNA traits, which I'm obsessed with, man, like connection, growth, toughness, and sacrifice, because they're not BS. Because I see how they are lived in this program. Dylan was a counselor at the Elite 11. You could feel him connecting with the high school guys. I can only imagine what he did at the dime time retreat, let alone every day in this facility. The growth side of this, like, what do they say? Take your medicine every Monday. Like, it's a growth mindset. Like, they are tough. Like, these DNA traits are really real. Even when you look at the sacrifice thing, like, am I going to run a go route to clear out a tight end, over route for T-Ferg? Like, those are the things that I see when I'm watching this team in the spring. I'd imagine I'll see them again this afternoon at practice. And that's why I think they're saying the things that you heard at their media days. It's because it's grounded in real confidence. It's not grounded in like, hey, maybe we can get lucky. We can catch somebody slipping, or we're just aspirational because it's training camp. So I think that's a thing. And then I just net out with, like, I would imagine in every meeting that Dan Lanning's having, you're hearing how this team is mission minded, and they are just connected to the day, connected to the moment. I was with Pete Carroll yesterday at UW, and we talked a lot about that, of like, how connected can you be to this play in team run, knowing that this rep can get you the 1 yard you need in the semifinals on your way to the national championship game. Like, that is the mindset. I felt that in spring. I imagine I'm going to feel that this afternoon. And you obviously heard elements of that.
Yeah. Last one I had for you here is I want to look crazy. I usually predict the outcomes of the season. I actually did go 12-0 for Oregon, which
Nice.
is a lot. When you hear me say that, or you look at the schedule and you try to piece together like what the most likely outcome is, like, am I crazy for thinking they could win all these games? Like, what's your perspective when you hear that sort of expectations? Because I don't think I'm alone in Eugene or in this Oregon market feeling like this Oregon team could have a really special season based upon the roster and some of the stuff we were just talking about with the kind of the mental makeup of it all.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. I don't have the schedule in front of me. I wish I did, because I don't remember where their buys are. Like, and like the games that you might, can you rip it off for me real quick?
Well, I think they have their first bye. Well, they have one bye right before Washington, the very end of the season, in between the two big ones there, and then they have their first is, I think, right after UCLA, in between UCLA and Michigan State.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, no, I don't think it's ridiculous. Like, I do the same thing when you look on paper and you're like, okay, how do I predict the season and try to pick your games? No doubt, I think they'll be favored. You look at the Ohio State game, and at home, I think Autzen is an advantage in this one. And what are they, 34-2 or something like that in their most recent home games? Like, I think I wrote that down, like, since 2018. They're 34-2 at home. So will they have every opportunity to win every game? Yes. Uh, we know how challenging that is in a 9 conference game slate. Uh, and then you add in the conference championship game. To me, like I can go either way. I'm like, would they rather have a bye week because they won the Big Ten? Of course. Be pretty sick to have a home playoff game though too. And you just reference like where their bye is in advance of the UW game. So it's kind of like they'd have a little moment there in the final few weeks of the season to refresh their legs. But either way, they're in the mix. I think I'll have a better answer when I'm going to go see 11 more teams after today, but they should be they sh- everything that this team desires or any team desires is on the table for Oregon this year. And I'm just so confident. And I believe this. I've said it ad nauseum. Due to Nick Saban, due to Jim Harbaugh departing college football, there is space for a new face to emerge. And I get Kirby Smart takes up a ton of breathing room in the SEC, but fans on the West Coast don't talk about him. It's just a reality. Like I don't know if they do in your world. And even though his connection to Dan Lanning, like that is nobody's talking about him the way they talk about Nick Saban or Jim Harbaugh. Ryan Day, he takes up a ton of space. They probably talk about him to that degree. Um, I think Dan Lanning's got a chance to be that guy. Like I really do. I think he's going to be the face of the sport for the next handful of years, as long as he wants to be a head coach in college at Oregon.
Great stuff, Yogi. Tell the listeners, like I know you've got other projects going, other things working. You're a busy guy. Tell us about that, and then maybe give us an idea of where you're going to be. Is this every day continuously? Like, what's your travel schedule there? Are you just hopping across the country on a flight? Are you flying every day right now?
Pretty much, yeah. I am going home tonight, give my kids a hug and a kiss, and then fly out again tomorrow. So I'll see them for breakfast, and then head to the airport. I'm going to go to Pittsburgh, go see my Pitt Panthers, and then off to Penn State, and Penn State to Rutgers to Ohio State to Indiana to Purdue, home to do SC and UCLA, which will be nice, and then Nebraska, Michigan State, Michigan. And then I'll be back up in this neck of the woods. I'm going to call the Nike Kickoff Classic, actually, which is really cool because it's girls' high school football, flag football, and then a high school game on Nike's campus, August 22nd. And then we're in game week right after that. So, yeah, it is pedal to the metal. Get your sleep. Try to work out as often as possible. Try to limit myself to only one of these, 1 cup of coffee a day, to not just crush your soul while you're on the road. But it's still I'm living a dream. Like, what am I up to? To take a line from the late great Bill Walton, like I feel like the luckiest guy in the world, man. Like I've got a 9-year-old son, and I look at him pretty regularly, and I say, wow, when I was his age, I was calling my own games in the backyard. Didn't even know this was a career, Erik, and now I get to travel the country, see these historic new programs, and then create my own thing with Y Option, where I get to have a little agency, bring people on. Like I don't have to clear anything with the boss. Like I just text Jim Thornby. I'm like, hey, let's have so and so on today, and away we go. So that's been kind of fun, and that's what I'm looking forward to this season. I'm looking forward to throwing down with my new colleagues at the Big Ten, my new partner in Guy Haberman and Rhett Lewis. Can't wait for you to have them on your show in advance of the season. You'll love those guys, just football nerds. Guy is a stud. He's been doing this forever, and the Big Ten said, hey, we believe in you. And it's awesome. I'm so happy for him. And Rhett Lewis is an NFL guy through and through, played wide out in college in Indiana. So us three are going to have a blast on the road and then do my own thing with Y Option. So those are the things, and then be a dad and husband and coach a little flag football on the side. But I got no room for anything else right now, man.
Yeah. Well, enjoy the month of August. Keep living the dream. And thank you so much for giving us some time this morning. It's great. And we'll have to connect after practice since I'll see you over there in several hours.
Yeah. Ping me. We'll be done probably, I don't know, 45 minutes after practice. So you'll be doing all your interviews, and I'll come find you in the courtyard.
All right. He's Yogi Roth. Thank you so much. And talk to you later, folks.
Thanks, man.
Hey, no, thank you.